In a necro state, death is part of governance. In a necropolitical state, the government has the power to decide who lives and who dies. Necropolitics is a term coined by Achille Mbembe. He uses the term necropolitics to describe how nation-states use power to control mortality. In doing so, these states decide who gets to live and whose bodies are disposable. Now, you may have heard of the concept of biopolitics or biopower. That's Michel Foucault's theory about governing life and providing services as a government that help people live, like healthcare. But necropolitics is the darker side of that coin. It is the politics of death. This is where certain groups are put under conditions that increase their risk of mortality or put into situations where their death is politically tolerated. Now, necropolitics is not just a theory, it is a reality. Necropolitical logic plays out in policy decisions. One example is with immigration enforcement, detention, and deaths. Reuters reports that in the first week of 2026, at least 4 immigrants have died in ICE detention. Hundreds more are in overcrowded facilities. Now, the ACLU reports that these deaths were preventable. Deaths in detention are linked to poor healthcare and neglect. And as we've observed, violent encounters, especially shootings that have led to death by ICE agents, further underscore how immigration enforcement is leading to state-sponsored death. Another example of policy within a necropolitical state has to do with immigration enforcement at the borders. Over the past 2 decades, human rights groups have documented thousands of immigrant deaths and disappearances under U.S. deterrence policies. Now, these policies have closed the border in certain areas and allowed it to remain unpatrolled in others, particularly areas that are in the desert or have extreme heat. And through heat exhaustion and exposure to elements, people lose their lives. This is not a coincidence. It is driven by policy. And a final example I'll leave you with is U.S. military interventions abroad. You can pick, there are so many, but lately the U.S. has been putting its sticky little fingers in Venezuela and in the Caribbean. In Latin America, the U.S. recently conducted military actions that some nations have decried as illegal. These have resulted in dozens of deaths, particularly of Cuban military personnel. These kinds of interventions illustrate how powerful nation states assert control over the lives and deaths of people far beyond their borders. So in necropolitical terms, these deaths are not accidental. They are driven by policy. In a necropolitical state, certain